Good morning. Thank you so much for being here for our latest Learn and Grow seminar. This one is on annual stewardship campaigns. My name is Dustin Petz, and I serve as the president of the Kansas Methodist Foundation. Let us begin with a time of prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this glorious day which you have made. Remind us that you are the one who creates us and breathes life into us, and you are the one who entrusts with us resources of all sorts, time and talents and financial resources and relationships. Help us to be good stewards of those. Help us to give to you joyfully and generously because of your great generosity in Jesus Christ. Pour out your blessing upon Lance as he presents, upon all of us as we learn and prepare. Know that you are with us. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Today we're joined with a presentation from Reverend Lance Carrithers on annual stewardship campaigns. Lance served as the United Methodist pastor, serving churches here in Kansas since 1989. He currently serves as the lead pastor of Woodlawn United Methodist Church in Derby. He previously was on the board of ordained ministry for the Kansas West Annual Conference, was a trustee for the United Methodist Health Ministry Fund, was on the site council for Camp Lakeside and other conference and district committees throughout the years. He currently serves as a site council member for Camp Horizon, and I'm excited and grateful to say he's also one of the board of trustee members for our foundation. Lance, it is a great joy for you to be leading us today. Thank you. We welcome your presentation.
Thank you, Dustin, and appreciate all of you being here. And I see a couple of faces from other congregations that I have served. And so they will keep me honest. If I start bragging a little bit or saying something that they know is not true, they're invited to do a thumbs down or something. Dan and Mike can kind of thumbs down and say, that's not right. That isn't right. But you guys may hear something that you're familiar with along the way. But it's good to be with you. And just a disclaimer, the understanding that COVID has changed everything. And it's made it a lot harder, I think, to do the things that we just have always done in the local church. And one of those things is raising revenue for the ministry that we want to do. And so I just say that as a way of saying that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is related to just how annual campaigns work and how I have implemented annual campaigns in churches. And along the way, we may talk a little bit about COVID, but I'm not the expert in how things might be changed or adapted in this post-COVID time, or I guess now we can't say post-COVID as we're back in another resurgence, but certainly in the question and answer, we might look to the wisdom of all the group when we start talking about that. So I think every stewardship campaign should begin with a little bit of thought into what is the purpose of a stewardship campaign? Because, purpose is going to drive how people feel about participating in a stewardship campaign, how they connect that to their own discipleship, how they're going to feel about just stewardship and giving in general. It drives everything that we do. So at the outset, I want you to think a little bit about what you believe the purpose is of a stewardship campaign. And I'm going to invite you to write into the chat, and this will go out to everyone so that everyone can kind of look at some of the answers. Write into the chat what you believe the purpose of a stewardship campaign to be.
Annie says to help congregants think about how God is calling them to worship through prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness.
Okay, good.
I had put out The purpose is a means to help people grow in their relationship with God through stewarding the resources entrusted to them.
Okay.
Steve says, make congregants become self-aware of their gifts and the joy of sharing those gifts. Linda says to have congregational vision of ministry and to develop a relationship with Jesus. Dan says to fund ministry. Barb says to drive the budget, which drives the programs and staff for ministry. And Debbie says to encourage members and friends to share their resources, not just money, with their church. And Barry says to help the members of the congregation understand that generosity is a spiritual gift that defines us as followers of Jesus.
Excellent. Good. Well, I appreciate, and you can continue to put one or two more up if you haven't gotten a chance yet, but I appreciate how many of your answers were related to spiritual development or to discipleship. Sometimes, we ask, for example, in a stewardship committee or in a finance committee, what the purpose of a stewardship campaign is, and the answers will sort of come out, well, it's to raise funds, to fund the budget, to get more money for ministry this year than we got last year, to have an increase in our revenue, or to engage more people to carry the load of the church's expenditures, to broaden out the base of support. And so oftentimes, we kind of get into a dollar and cents mode when we think about the purpose of an annual stewardship campaign. So I appreciate those of you that really moved very quickly to more of a spiritual place. And let me share with you what for me, basically what the purpose of an annual campaign is. I believe that it is to help people understand God's providence. And I really just kind of stop there. What do I mean by God's providence? To understand that everything that people have, everything that they hold, and everything that comes to them belongs first to God and is a gift from God. And so that's what I mean by, I think the stewardship campaign is to help people remember if it's something that they've already incorporated into their lives, or to discover what God's providence means. Once a person begins to understand that everything belongs to God, and so that everything that I have, everything that has come to me, everything that even my ability to perform work for income is because of God's gifts, the gift of health and strength and intelligence and daylight and time, and whatever goes into you performing the work that you do for your income, even that is a gift from God. And so toward that end, I often begin biblically with touch points that remind us that everything belongs to God, and that everything that we have, everything that we hold, is a gift from God. Passages like these that I have on the screen right now from Deuteronomy and the Psalms that remind us over and over that everything belongs to God, not just everything here on earth, but everything in all of the universe. It is created by God. It belongs to God. If you think, well, that's nice. Yeah, we know the natural world and everything that was created belongs to God, but money doesn't necessarily belong to God. Well, in the Bible, we actually have a passage from the prophet that says, no, the silver is mine, says God. The gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. In Daniel, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to God. So not just the created things of the world, but those things that we attribute to our own, our wisdom and our power, the things that are intrinsically a part of who we are, they belong to God as well. And to know that God is generous with what God has. Philippians 4:19 reminds us, my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Jesus Christ. Now, according to God's riches, how rich is God? How rich is God if God is the holder of all things? If all belongs to God, then God is the richest of the rich. And out of those riches will supply anything and everything that we need, supplies anything and everything that we hold. So that's the starting point. I think once a person accepts that everything belongs to God and that God is generous with gifts that God supplies back to me, gives me an abundance far more than I need, then I'm moved to gratitude. And that's the shift. I think that's very important in a stewardship campaign, to move from a place to where what I have is mine. I own it. I hold it. I earned it. And move instead to this idea that it's God's. God has been generous with me and asks that I might be generous with anything that is beyond what meets my basic needs. You know, so that's kind of the starting point of what we're going to talk about today. So when I think about annual stewardship campaigns, there's three questions that I think are primary to answer. One is when do you do it? I've been doing this for about 30 years, so I'm fairly traditional. So I look at an annual campaign as a one-time event each year, usually held in the fall. The churches that I've served, that has worked well, either in October or maybe perhaps bumping from October into November. If you're interested, there are some folks that are developing ideas around stewardship campaigns that occur more often. Some that look at a twice a year moment where you ask people to commit to their giving for the next 6 months, doing that in the spring and doing it again in the fall. And I even was aware of a church that had moved to a quarterly, not a campaign, stewardship campaign, but each quarter using one Sunday of that quarter to ask people to commit again for their giving for the next quarter. I personally like the annual campaign, and the reason that I like the annual campaign is it puts it into the life of the church as an annual event. Much like the Christian calendar, where Advent and Christmas come around once a year, and you kind of look forward to those and their special times, or Lent and Easter come around once a year. So the stewardship campaign comes around every year in the fall, and it becomes an anticipated and expected event in the life of the church. So we may have some questions about that later on, but that's kind of what has been helpful for me, is to look at the annual campaign in the fall. The next question is who. If you're a pastor, you're not going to do this alone. If you're a member of the finance committee, or if you're a member of a stewardship committee, if your church has a stewardship committee, or if you're the lay leader, you're not going to do it alone. I've done this a couple of ways in different congregations that I've been a part of. I've been in congregations that had a separate stewardship team that is separate from the finance committee. There might be some members of the finance committee who serve on that stewardship team, but they're separate and they operate separately. And that's so that those that are thinking about focusing on God's providence, how God is the giver of gifts that we then feel grateful for in our lives, that they are free to focus on that instead of worrying about reviewing the expenditures of the church and meeting the budget and building the budget. The stewardship committee can focus on thankfulness and God's giftedness. But there have been times, in fact, here at Woodlawn, where we prepare the stewardship campaign out of the finance committee. And so it can be done that way. But I think when it is done that way, the finance committee might approve the annual campaign, but they look to the pastor to be the leader who will implement that. And even then, the pastor cannot do it alone. So I think you need to be thinking about who are the people in your congregation who already exhibit that attitude of gratefulness and thanksgiving. They get that God is the holder of all things, and that they are the beneficiary of what God has given them. Think about those who can help you carry out the campaign. At the very least, you're going to need volunteers who will help with communication, will help in giving testimony and putting a face on the campaign in the local congregation. These are folks that you want to start recruiting to work on the annual stewardship campaign. And so the last question is, so what kind of campaign is this going to be? What is the structure of it? There's a variety of types of annual campaigns. I think probably the most familiar is the mail out, mail in, or mail out, bring in type of campaign, where you mail out materials, mail out pledge cards, and you ask people to return them. I've modified that a little bit, and I'll say a bit more about that here in a second. There's also the Consecration Sunday is a very popular type of annual campaign. The Consecration or Celebration Sunday, sometimes it's called. This was developed by Herb Miller many years ago, and it's been updated, but it centers around asking people to pledge or make a commitment, bring them all back on one particular Consecration Sunday or Celebration Sunday, and then having a celebration meal together where everyone eats together, and then an announcement is made as to the total amount of pledges that were consecrated that morning in worship. Oftentimes, a Consecration Sunday also involves bringing in a speaker, so that it is not your own local pastor or someone in your congregation that is talking about stewardship and giving, but someone that you would bring in as the out-of-town expert, so to speak. And so if you're interested in that, you can find information out. In fact, I think in Dustin's list of resources, the Herb Miller's Consecration Sunday is one of those. Another one that has been around a long time is the pass the container structure of a campaign. A real popular one was called the saddlebag campaign, where literally saddlebags are passed from household to household. Inside the saddlebag are the campaign materials and the blank pledge cards. So the saddlebag is delivered to your home, you read the materials, you take out the pledge card, you fill it out, you put it in an envelope, you seal it, and you put it back in the saddlebag. So as the saddlebag makes its rounds, and it can be other types of containers as well, house to house, then people see that others have completed their pledge, and they pass it on. Now, this works well in pretty small congregations where perhaps you have 50 households or fewer, and it's easy to get a container or a couple of containers sent around to everyone in the congregation. Or it works in larger congregations that have very well-developed neighborhood units organized in their church, where geographically they have their entire congregation demarked by where they live, so that within a neighborhood of 10 to 12 households, a container could make its round around a neighborhood unit. So I know of this particular style of campaign that works well in those situations as well. It's a campaign that causes people to kind of buy into it, because as they receive the saddlebag, they see their neighbors are filling out cards because they see the sealed envelopes with their names on them. So they know who has completed the commitment, and that kind of helps them say, oh, I want to do my part. I want to be a part of that. And so that's why that particular campaign, I think, was developed. Now, I mentioned that I've sort of been partial to the distribute information out and bring the pledge card back in style of campaign. And the modification that I have made to this, I got it from someone. I don't remember where I stole it now, but is the idea not of mailing out the initial campaign materials in the ask, but to hand those out in worship, in a packet of information that you give to people. Then you reference that packet over the course of the morning's worship service. And people are then asked within a week's time to come back and bring back their commitment. And I'll say more about exactly what that looks like and do that in the context of what the timing of that would look like and what is in the packet. So it's a handout packet, and then asking people to bring it back in. You do mail it to those who don't come to worship to receive their packet. You try to get as many people as you can within a week to bring back that pledge. And then you have a couple of follow-up weeks where you're trying to get those who perhaps received the information in the mail or who have been slow to respond, giving them an opportunity to respond. And that's the structure of a campaign that I found to be pretty helpful in the congregations that I've served. So what would this look like over the course of an actual campaign in the fall? Well, there's a launch Sunday, or the first Sunday. And prior to that, an invitation goes out that sort of introduces the theme, and I'll say a little bit more about that here in a moment. But I've done this just with a postcard, and this is a sample of a postcard. It doesn't contain a lot of information. You're just trying to tell people that this anticipated time in the life of the congregation each year is arriving, and we really want you to be in worship for it. So it would include elements of the theme. This particular one is Count Me In. It tells you the date that the kickoff is going to be held, or the launch of the campaign. It asks people if they please would be in worship that day because they're going to receive their pledge packet before worship, asking them to stop, pick it up, and that during worship, they will need to have that packet so that they can reference it. So this is a little postcard, doesn't have a whole lot of information, just to let people know that the launch Sunday is coming. And then on that launch Sunday, that's when the packets are handed out and the first message is preached. And I'll say more about the message here in a minute. But so packet, I keep talking about a packet. What is in a packet? So there's several items that I think are important in having in that packet that you hand out to people on Sunday morning. And remember, you do this where you hand it out and cross their names off of a list so that you have a list that you can mail the packets to those who are not in worship on that Sunday. So you want to make sure that you're handing them out to people and you know who receives their packet on that Sunday morning. So in the packet is, first of all, just a letter on the theme, a letter on really encouraging people to think about everything belonging to God, that God is a generous God who has been good to us, has given us an abundance that is beyond what our own needs are, and asks us in gratitude for all of that to think about what portion of what we have received from God might we want to return for God's work through the church. And so this letter will be typically with a key scriptural verse and be framed in the theme and that you've chosen for the campaign, and that will be the cover letter. And then in the packet will be a narrative budget. A narrative budget differs from a line item budget. Some of you use narrative budgets. A line item budget tells you what is spent on what. A narrative budget tells you what is spent in some of the broad categories of the church's expenditures, like program or maybe education, operation, building facilities, staffing. But then it tells you the impact of the expenditure in those areas. So if a church has spent a certain amount of money on children's education, then you might include a story or an illustration of what has been the impact of that church's ministry in for children and spiritually forming children to be disciples of Jesus Christ. So I'm not going to say a lot more about a narrative budget because I know there's an upcoming seminar that the foundation is going to offer just on narrative budgets, but they're a very helpful tool. So the narrative budget would be the second item in that packet. And then there's a couple of charts that I'm interested in putting into the packet. A proportionate giving chart and a step-up chart. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of these. This is what I mean by a proportionate giving chart. It allows people to go and, first of all, find their income. Now, they may know their income roughly what they make a month. They may know their income roughly what they make a year. And they would follow down the column until they come to the level of their income. And then the chart is asking them not to just decide what dollar amount that they want to give, but it asks them to consider what is the portion, what is the percentage of everything that has come to you, of your total income. What is the portion of that in gratitude you would want to return for God's work through the church? So the instructions would ask someone to find their income. Let's say someone's making $5,000 a year, $60,000 or $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. And to find, first of all, what their current level of giving is. So maybe they're giving $150 a month. Now, a person giving $150 a month, if they're asked to increase their pledge, they might increase that to $160 a month. But you're asking them to begin thinking about what is the percentage of all that they have been given by God that they would like to return. So they look up here and they look at, well, they're giving 3% of their income currently to the church. And maybe they are interested in growing toward a tithe or interested at least in growing in their own discipleship. And you ask them to begin to think about, would they be interested in increasing the percentage of their giving by a percentage level, growing toward the tithe? So if they're giving $150, would they consider moving from 3% to 4% and consider giving $200 a month this year? And each year asking them, as a matter of your own spiritual formation, are you willing to grow each year 1%, with the end goal being reaching a level of tithing 10% of one's income for God's work? But all this is continuing to keep the focus on portion and percentage more than the dollar amount. The other chart that I mentioned is a step-up chart, and it is a little more focused on a dollar amount. And it's just to kind of help those that aren't really ready to embrace this idea that I want to grow toward a tithe, or I really want to increase the portion of my gift each year. And it also allows them to see the entire congregation and where that congregation is in their giving. So on this step-up chart, and you'll see various step-up charts in many of the stewardship campaigns that you can purchase. For example, if you're not creating your own and you're purchasing a ready-made campaign, they often will have a step-up chart. But in the white boxes, we have a total in this congregation of 633 giving or total households. That's how many households are in the congregation. And then I asked my financial secretary to determine, of those 633 households, how many are giving households and how many are non-giving households. And of the 406 giving households, at what level are they giving? So in this illustration, we had no households giving at $300 or more a week. This is weekly giving on this particular chart. We had 5 that were giving between 2 and 300, 33 between 1 and 200, and so on, all the way down to where we had 119 of those giving units giving somewhere between $1 and $10 a week. And we had 227 households where we had no gift recorded for the year. And this allows someone to say, well, you know, if I'm giving $50 a week, I'm sitting here, I'm one of the 41 households. But then, you know, I might assess, it's human nature to kind of make comparison in the congregation, comparison with your neighbors. And you might assess, is that where I really think I want to be? And am I willing to consider taking one step up? If I'm giving $50, instead of giving 60, would I be willing to go ahead and step up to this 61 to 80 and get somewhere in that level that would put me in the next step of persons in the congregation and their giving? And so it's just another way to invite people to make an increase in their gift based on the number of people that are giving at each level. And then I think there is a whole nother strategy for these 227 households that's addressed in the Sunday morning message and addressed in the letter, that you're really asking them, are they willing to step out in faith and begin to make some recordable gift for God's work? And so you're trying to ask those who are giving to step up, and those who are not giving to just begin by making a gift. So these charts are the proportionate giving chart and the step up chart are in that packet. And then of course there's a pledge card and a return envelope. I think you all probably know what a pledge card looks like. This particular pledge card has a place to pledge toward the general fund, the operational fund, but also to make a gift toward the capital fund for building maintenance and improvements. And they put how much they are willing to give per week or how much they're willing to give per month. And if they want to make an automatic withdrawal or manage their giving online, they check the box. And again, you can find lots of pledge card. My mouse is, what a time for the battery in my mouse to start going in and out. And then the final thing is a set of instructions. And I typically will lay the instructions on top of the theme letter or cover letter. And let me give you an example of what that might look like. Just a moment. There. And I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit so you can see. So it starts out just what is in the packet, and then very specifically what you're asking every person to do. You're asking them to read the letter, review the narrative budget, study the Step It Up chart, study the proportionate giving chart, complete, sign, and return their pledge card, and giving them a deadline for when you're asking them to complete that and return that. And if they wish to start electronic giving or automatic withdrawal, what they need to do in order to be able to do that. And then we always include a little statement about why that's important. In the last several congregations that I have served, it's been very important to us to build a balanced budget. And that means you're doing the campaign early enough in the fall that you know pretty much you can determine what your revenue is going to be for the year from your pledged giving, and then the percentage of your unpledged giving that you typically bring in as a congregation. You know what your revenue is going to be so that you can propose a budget that is the same as or less than your projected revenue. Now that's different. I know there are congregations that build their budget and put out their ministry goals and say, this is what we want to accomplish, and it's going to cost X number of dollars, and then do their campaign as a rally to try to get people to reach that level so that they will raise enough revenue in order to be able to fund the budget. I don't have any qualms with that. I just think it's been more prudent in my experience and more helpful to churches, been a little healthier in many ways, to build the budget based on the revenue and letting people know what your dreams, what your hopes are, but in the end, building a budget that does not exceed the revenue that you really project will be coming in. So we explain that in the why it's important, and we always have the stewardship team who is working on that particular campaign be the signers of the letters. So those are the elements of the packet. And so how do we go forward in putting that together? So the Monday after that launch Sunday, I've already mentioned we mailed the packets that were not picked up. We asked for the pledges to be returned that second Sunday. And sometimes I offer another message on the theme, kind of a follow-up message to the stewardship campaign. Then after the second Sunday, early in the week, we send a postcard reminder to anyone who has not yet responded, just saying, remember, we're needing your commitments back so that we can go ahead with our budgeting process. And thank you for considering, and would you please prayerfully consider your gift. The third Sunday, we will again call for a return of pledges. And this may be the consecration Sunday if we have planned a dinner or a celebration of some kind. But early in the week after that third Sunday, again, a reminder for anyone who has not responded. If the campaign draws out to 4 Sundays, then the consecration Sunday is held on that 4th Sunday if it was not held on the 3rd. And then you finally arrive at the final week, and it's the week after whatever the consecration Sunday or whatever the Sunday is where you dedicated the pledges on the offering and thanked people for their gifts. You do send out, or I do, one final reminder letter, this time not a postcard, but a letter with another pledge card and another envelope that just says you haven't missed out. There is still time. Our campaign is concluded and we're very pleased, but we will be able to do more ministry with your gift, and we'd like to be able to include that in our estimate of revenue for the coming year. And then very important, after the campaign is complete, it's important to send acknowledgements out. And we have our financial secretary who happened here. They're called our accountant. And they send out an acknowledgement letter thanking them, what the amount of the pledge is that we have recorded for them, and then letting them know that if there's an error to please respond back to the financial secretary directly and let them know. Otherwise, just again, thanking them for making their pledge and being a part of the campaign. I think that acknowledgement is very important. And then in addition to the acknowledgement is the ongoing reporting. Just some churches do it every quarter. We do it about every 2 months here at Woodlawn. We send out the report of their giving statement so that they know where they are every couple of months through the course of the year. Just in the time that we have left, I want to talk a little bit about theme and message. So themes, again, you might purchase a stewardship campaign that you use in your congregation. They will give you their theme. It'll have a theme and a key scripture verse and everything. I've enjoyed always trying to create a theme that really fits the congregation for whom it's designed. And so I'm going to talk about just some examples. I was in a church one time that was smaller, and they always loved fellowship dinners, and they always had when it was the weather was good, a pig roast or barbecue or something. So the idea was to have a pig roast as the consecration Sunday, right? A big celebratory dinner. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought that would make a great theme for the whole campaign. And we called it the Whole Hog Campaign. And in that campaign, we talked about how God goes whole hog in on God's generosity with us. And are we willing then to go whole hog in gratitude for what God has done for us in our giving to God's ministry through the church? And one of the things I remember about that theme is we took a hog butchering chart, the little pictures of a pig, and it's divided up on where the ribs come from and where the bacon comes from and the hams and the picnics and everything. And we took that little chart, and that was our narrative budget. And we carved up the pig, program, staffing, building and facilities, operations. And we had a lot of fun with it. I think that's important in a campaign. Here at Woodlawn, we did a campaign called It's a Wonderful Church. based on the Capra film. And we talked about what would be different in Derby, Kansas, if Woodlawn Church had never existed. Much like George, when he's confronted by Clarence the angel, if you had never existed, all these things would be different. We talked about the church's history and all the things, the impact that they had had in the community and in a larger sense, in not only the community here, but in the state, the conference, and the world. What would be missing if this church had not ever been? And that allowed us to really not only celebrate our history, but make a commitment for the future. We wanted to continue to be a church that made an impact in the future. It's a wonderful church. Count me in. You saw some of the graphics from that and some of the samples. That was about belonging. I want to be a part of that number. We use that when the saints go marching in. I want to be a part of that number. Count me in. I want to be a part of the ones that contribute to the ministry, God's ministry through the church. And so we used that as a theme. In Dodge City, used a theme one time, living waters. Out in Western Kansas, water is hard to come by. And part of the reason, the Arkansas River is a dry riverbed as it runs through Dodge City. And the reason is, on the Colorado side of the line, they have dammed up the river and created large reservoirs, John Redmond Reservoir, huge reservoirs. And they were hoarding up the water and not letting any water come on downstream for the benefit of anyone downstream. And it was a perfect illustration of persons that receive everything that God has to offer them, receive everything that God has to give them, and hold on to it, keep it up all for themselves, where we're called instead to release, to be an instrument and a stream of mercy for those who might be downstream from us, that what we are given is a gift from God that should be released. And I thought that was an effective campaign, in that setting where people understood what it was to live without water coming down the river because of the hoarding that was taking place upstream. Here at Woodlawn last year with COVID, we had to rethink our whole campaign because we couldn't do the message in person and we couldn't do the things that we wanted to do live. And so we did one called ROI. Those of you that are in business, that's return on investment. And so we created 8 separate narrative budgets. We broke each part of the budget up into its own investment sheet. And we talked about the investment that was being made in each of these areas. What was the return on investment? What was the impact, in other words? And so we had a pie chart. We broke out each section of the budget, and it sort of looked like something you might receive from your financial planner. But in the course of that, we were talking about the investment that Woodlawn had been able to make in these areas and the difference that Woodlawn had been able to make because of the investment that people were willing to make. And we wanted to celebrate what was a high yield ministry in our return on investment. We did this all by mail. So there were 8 different, it was a longer campaign. There were 8 different mailings that we sent out, one each week, asking people as they began to reflect upon that return on investment, if they were willing to make an investment in the current year. Time goes by quickly. I do want to say just a couple of words about the big money sermon. Mike and Dan probably both know that's literally what I call it when I stand up in the pulpit on the annual campaign Sunday. I think it's a part of keeping it light, keeping a lot of humor in the message, because when we get very sincere talking about money, I think anxiety sort of increases. If it can be done in a humorous way, it'll diffuse some of that anxiety. So I talk about the elephant in the room. This is the big money sermon, but I always want to get it focused on purpose, God's providence. God is generous with us. We are grateful. Talking over and over about proportionate giving, giving some illustrations from my own life, that bullet that says lead with your personal witness about your own proportionate giving. I believe strongly in that. A pastor is the spiritual leader of the congregation. And as many of you identified in that very first question, what you believe the purpose of a stewardship campaign is, you understand that this is a spiritual issue, a spiritual issue of understanding who we are in relationship to God, and how grateful we are for what God gives to us. And so I think as a spiritual leader for a spiritual aspect of discipleship, the pastor has to say, this is why I tithe. This is why I give the portion that I give. This is where my gratefulness comes from. Sometimes pastors shy away from doing that for a couple of reasons. Some see it as a brag, and I think you can do it in a way with some humility to say, I tithe, but even as I tithe, I recognize that's only returning $1 out of every 10 that God allows me to keep for myself. I used an illustration one time of my sister dividing up Halloween candy with me. I was younger, she was older, so she'd one for you, two for me, one for you, two for me. And that was an awful thing for an older sibling to do to the younger sibling. But what do we do with God? One for you, 9 for me. One for you, 9 for me. So even in tithing, that's nothing to be to boast about or brag about. It's humbling when you recognize how much I still hold for my own purposes. Even if I return 1/10 of what has been given to me for God's work. So lead with your own personal witness if you're the pastor when you're talking about proportionate giving. And I think you have to make decisions easier to understand, breaking it down so that people can comprehend it. There's an example that I was going to offer about in our congregation here. We talked about what a nickel would do, what just 5 cents, a nickel, because 5 cents is 1/2 of 1% of a $10 bill. So every time someone receives a $10 bill, whether it's an income or as a gift or whatever, for every $10, were they willing to increase their giving by just a nickel, 1/2 of 1%? That's not even a step on the step chart, 1/2 of 1%. Well, then I took the average income in our community by the number of households in our church and demonstrated that 1/2 of 1%, or that one nickel on every $10, would amount to over $70,000 in additional income. And that coming into the budget would make all the difference in the world to be able to expand the ministry and the mission of the church. So try to figure out easy ways to break complicated, difficult, hard decisions about money into things that people can kind of wrap their heads around. Here at Woodlawn, I also talked about the tip jar. We don't think anything at all of seeing a tip jar on a counter and putting in 15 or 20% of our ticket because someone has served us, someone has done something for us. So in gratefulness, we'll put 15% in a tip jar, or we'll leave 20%, or some of us really, we feel good because sometimes we tip maybe 25 or 30% for really good service when someone, for what God has given us, God asks only for 10%, less than a tip jar. We would raise more revenue in the church with a tip jar than we do with a collection plate. And so think of things and ways that you can drive the message home to help people kind of think, oh my goodness, I'd never thought of that. So that every time they see a tip jar, they might be thinking about their own relationship with gratitude to God for all that God has given them.
Lance, this has been super helpful. Grateful for your presentation and the work leading your different churches. Are there final words you want to share?
I just I feel for you all in that this is a difficult season, but the more that we ourselves and the more that we can help others, just be reminded of how good, how generous God is, how abundant our resources are that are all around us. I think that in that message lies the key.
Thank you, Lance, for your presentation and work and leading with us. We pray God's blessing upon you and look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you so much for being here. Blessings for all of you. Bye-bye.